I think you're going to love today's show. I know I always say that, but today is one of those days when it's just you and me. No guest, no big fancy person coming, just me and you. And the reason why I love these days is because I get to share what's on my mind, not what's on somebody else's, not their expertise, not their book, not what they've been talking about, but the things that are just on my mind and how I come up with these things is I just think about life, what my life is, what's happening in my life right now. And then I think of all the great lessons that I've learned, and I think, I gotta share those. So today we're here to do just that. The title of this show, I think I'm going to entitle it The Least Likely Person to Succeed. So when John this morning asked me, what are you going to talk about? I said, I'm going to talk about the least likely person to succeed. And he said, who's that? And I said, that was me. And he just kind of stood there. He said, what? And I said, yeah. In high school, at the night of the senior banquet, you always have the person that's voted the most likely person to succeed. And while he was on stage, he said, and of course, we all know who the least likely person to succeed, but let's see what she does with her life. Mary Bolter. Well, that was me, and that was my maiden name. And everyone laughed. I laughed inside while I'm crying my eyes out. I know that all of you have been through that you have been through that moment where someone says something that is meant to be cutting, but they say it as a joke. So people laugh, you laugh, but inside the pain is almost unbearable. I kind of felt like that I was the least likely to succeed. I remember that year in our senior book that we get, what's that called? Yearbook. And I had written in the front of it, you were supposed to write, where you see yourself in 5 years and 10 years. And then everyone would write in the book and comment and those kind of things. And I wrote that in 5 years, I had hoped that I would have graduated from college and that I would be married and I would be starting a family. That was just what was done in Iowa. And we were in a small town. I lived in a town of 250 people. Okay, so that's very tiny. And I went to a high school in the adjacent town where there's 5,000 people. That was my big town. And everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew everyone's business. I really felt myself probably the least likely to succeed. And in my yearbook, up where I had written kind of my vision, people had written things like, oh, that'll be the day, or ha, or laughing out loud, or I remember a big smiley face with a tongue sticking out was written there like, that'll. And once again, there's that sense of we can say so much in sarcasm that is so hurtful and painful. Oftentimes, people say and think to me, now, Mary, how did you survive all that? How did you become who you are? So we're going to talk about all of that and what that looks like. Perhaps you were like me, and perhaps you have those moments when you still are. I was the least likely to succeed. I was from a small town in rural Iowa. We didn't really have fancy clothes or fancy restaurants. For us, a fancy restaurant was to go out to the Red Rooster, where you actually sat in a booth and got your plastic melamine plates, rather than going to a drive-up. And growing up in those kind of conditions, I wondered to myself, what was next for me? I didn't ever see myself as someone that would accomplish what I have accomplished. And now at age 71, I can look back on my life and think, you know what? it's been a pretty good life. And I have actually done a lot and ticked off a lot of goals, but not because I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, not because I was born in an area where opportunities abounded, not because I ever felt like I was a smart child. I had an older brother and an older sister. They were extremely smart, but not me. I was known as the problem child, the dumb one. So, least likely to succeed, and yet I have. If you're thinking that that's where you are in your life, that perhaps you're the least likely to succeed, you can get on board with me and sit next to me. I wasn't born special. I wasn't ever given the vision of what life could be and all the things that were waiting for me. I was never told someday, Mary, and to keep dreaming and blah, 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 all the things I tell people now. So if you are in that spot of not feeling that you were ever given anything special, then you can come and join my I'm Nothing Special Club. Because in the Nothing Special Club, what we learn is it not what's out here that's given to us or the circumstances that we see ourselves in. It's not the opportunities that we're gifted for a certain situation. In the Not So Special Club, it's only about what's in here and what you choose to do with it. I want to tell you a little bit about a personal experience that I had just yesterday. I think people see me as someone, even if they don't know me and they just follow me on social media, that I'm someone that's a safe place, someone that people can reach out to. I love that I'm a safe place, but I'm also aware that what's beyond my pay grade. I can help, I can encourage, I can give resources. I can't fix anyone. No one can. I can't offer you the best clinical advice. That's not my pay grade. My pay grade is to simply listen and then give back to you what I hear and what I see. I tell people, don't ask me for advice if you don't want an honest response, because it's not in my comfort zone just to placate and just to say, oh, you're going to be okay. You've just had a bad day. And, oh, shame on those people for treating you that way. I'm so sorry for you, blah, blah. That ain't what I'm coming up with. I can tell you that right now. Even to my best friends, they know that from me, they're going to get whatever it is I see. And before I start listening to someone, I even take a moment just to tune into them and really ask that I am guided and that I can see them, see who they truly are. And when you see somebody for who they truly are, what you see is beauty and this absolutely incredible sense of what an infinite soul looks like. But I also see the things that are lined up in advance of seeing that beautiful soul that are getting in their way. I'm never there to belittle anyone, but I'm always there to shine the light in my big flashlight that perhaps this is something they've not been looking at. So yesterday was kind of the case. And the reason I offered this person this feedback was because I think it's the answer to the question, a lot of the question that I get. People ask me this question. So Mary, if that was your childhood and this was your growing up years and these were the early years of your marriage and this was how you built the business and all these things that were going on in your life, how in the world did you end up here? As a woman who sees my worth, as a woman who's still bringing and drawing things into my life that create my best self and then lifting others to their best selves. How did that happen? What was the process? And it was that exact process that I wanted to share with this woman yesterday. I thought it might be of value to her. So as I listened to her story, and it was not a fun story of all the different things that she had gone through in her life, where she was born, what her parents were like, what happened next in her adoption, and then from there, what her first marriage was like. And then from there, all the struggles that she'd had with employment and where her husband was now and the struggles he suffers with emotionally. As I'm listening to this, the one consistent theme that I heard was, all these things have happened to me. And that was what I knew was her way out. If I hear from someone any glimmer of responsibility for where they are and what's happened in their lives, then I know that they are going to be okay and they're on the right track. But I didn't hear any of that from her. I only heard her victim story, time and time and time again, to the point where she didn't know if life was worth living because she had all these victim stories. When I think back on my own life, that is the key to how I got out of that mode and to the place of where I knew I could succeed. And that I'm not afraid to try new things now. Why? Because deep inside of me, I know I can succeed. Even in this last bit when John and I went to Puerto Vallarta and we were doing this zip lining and we were doing the rappelling and the water slides and all these things, and we're the oldest people there by like 20 years. And yet I just knew we could do it because all the tools to succeed were laid out with the harnesses, with the carabiners, with the guides. Their expertise were all there. I just had to move past my fear and step in with the belief that we could do it. And the moment I stepped in, John didn't have a choice but to come right behind me because he's kind of that never say die kind of guy. You just would not do that. So to this woman, I tried to expose to her the possibility that maybe all these things continue to happen in her life because she has a victim mindset. And when you have a victim mindset, you are setting up tragedy, drama, trauma to happen to you. It's that old self-fulfilling prophecy. So certainly in the early years of my college, in the early years of my marriage and my business, that's what I had in my head, that I was a victim. I was not in control of all these horrible things that were happening to me. And in fact, I had never been in control. I had been handed excuses from the time I was little for why I was the way I was. Oh, it's okay, Mary, that you're fat because your Aunt Neva is fat and you're just like her. Oh, I have an excuse. Not anything that I'm doing, not any of my own behavior, but just because Aunt Neva was and I looked just like her. I gave myself excuse after excuse to be the way that I was until I didn't. If you want to change, if your desires in your heart are to step out of victimville and to stop having repeated one after another things happening to you, then choose that. Choose to no longer be a victim. In my book, I spend a whole chapter on packing your bags and let's leave Victimville. And if you haven't purchased either my book or my audio, I would encourage you to do that. It's on Amazon. And I used to be an avid reader. I used to read 15 books a year. And I guess that's not an avid reader, but I read a lot. As life happened to me, I began to read less and less. And finally, last year, I was down to reading 2 books a year and sometimes skimming them because my time seemed so short. But then I discovered Audible. And now I'm back to reading 12 to 15 books a year. I just finished Let Them by one of my favorite podcasters and thought leaders, Mel Robbins. And I think my book, and whether you read it or whether you listen in audio, will really give you a glimpse into what it's like to leave Victimville. I would still be in that marriage. I would still be unhealthy emotionally and physically and mentally and socially and spiritually if I had not made the decision to pack my bags and get out of Dodge or Victimville. I would still be stuck there. Now, a lot of people say to me, Mary, what are you talking about? You were always a happy person. I was always on the outside a happy person. But on the inside, I was not. And I wanted more than anything, get that, read that again. I wanted more than anything to have what I portrayed on the outside be the reflection of what I felt on the inside. I didn't want to hide any longer. I did not want to hide and put on the mask that said, Mary's okay, Mary's doing great, Mary's a successful business owner, Mary's a mother, she's a wife, she's doing everything in her community. But I was still hiding who I really was and the pain inside. The moment I made the decision to not be a victim anymore was the moment I knew I was going to find my way out. I was going to find my way out. You've heard me say this before, and it's another book I want you to read. The book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Every single thing he had was taken away from him in the Nazi concentration camps. And yet he survived because what he realized was they could take all of this from him, but they couldn't take his mind. And that was his to control, to use as he wanted. It was his to think the way that he wanted. And when I finally made the decision that no one was controlling my mind but me, then I could shift. The great news about being responsible for where you are in life is that you can change it. I was a little worried about talking to this woman about that she was responsible for where she was in her life. If she truly was suicidal, sometimes that's not the right thing to say. So I talked to her enough in advance, had her go stand in the sun for a while and get those endorphins going till I knew she was going to be okay. And then I talked to her about stepping out. How that looks, how you get to do that. The very first step, and this is the one that I encourage everyone to look at. The very first step is to recognize that you are playing the victim. Not that you're being the victim, not that you are a victim, but that you're playing the victim. Because no one can put you there unless you want to be there. If you make a decision to step away and to no longer be a victim, That is a mental thing, and it doesn't matter what your circumstances are. It didn't matter that Viktor Frankl had his body being experimented on in the Nazi concentration camps. His mind still could not be controlled, and he chose. And when he left, he dedicated his life to lifting people out of victim and into victor. How fitting that his name is Victor, right? As I talked to this woman yesterday, I told her that one of the best tools you'll have in stepping away from being a victim is to be your very best self. I kind of outlined this whole thing to her, and then she came back and said, I don't really understand what you're saying to me. I get that. Because if we've been living as our circumstances are all someone else's responsibility and all someone else's problem, it's hard to understand how we personally can be living our best life. So let's think of it this way. If you are a victim, then you are not in control. After a talk one day, I had a woman come up to me and say, in tears, Mary, if I'm not a victim, so do you mean all those things that my dad did to me in the dark, in my room, were my responsibility? And I said to her as I held her in my arms, oh no, my love. Those are his responsibility. And he can't blame you for being too cute, or for his wife not giving him sex, or he can't blame you because he had been abused. Those are his responsibility. Now he is a grown man, and they're his choices. And we certainly can offer him tools to move away from that if he chooses. But the one thing that is your responsibility, my love, is how you react to it and what you do with it and how it changes your life to be who you want to be. If you're still playing the victim of your dad, you will always play that victim. But if you choose today to see that all of that sickness and craziness was his, and he certainly did victim things to you, but today you can stop and no longer be his victim. You can choose today to be your own best self, to be your own hero, and stand up. I can remember what it was like to feel like the weight of the world, the responsibility of everything that had ever happened in my life on my back. I even felt responsible for what was happening in everyone else's life on my back. And then I began to dream. What would that feel like if I just stood up? What would that feel like if I shrugged my shoulders, shrugged off all the stuff that had happened to me as a child, and stood up and made a decision that today I get to choose how I feel and what I do? My friends, that is how I survived. That is how I became Mary Crafts, is I stood up and I made a decision to no longer be a victim. I wrote it on Post-it notes. I put it everywhere. I'm not a victim. It's kind of where I started. That wasn't the positive side of that. But when I stood up, it began to change and evolve. I'm in control of my life. My life is mine to mold. It began to be things like, I am who I am because of my attitude. Not my attitude is what it is because of what has happened to me. I began to make a mental note of every single time I had a choice to be my very best self. And what would that look like? I put it on my mirror. What would I do today if I were no longer afraid? And now I have in my mind as my mental help every single morning, what am I going to bring today that is my very best self? When I got up this morning, I knew I was going to do this podcast. And I thought, it's so easy just to call someone and say, come join me on my podcast. It's harder to do your own podcast and just keep talking and try and make sense of something for someone who's listening. But I didn't want to choose the easy way out. I wanted to choose the best way to be today. And I knew the best thing that I could do today for me and for you and for lifting myself and you was to tell you about my journey. My journey from being a victim, my journey from being the least likely to succeed, to seeing what that was looking like. I stayed a victim of my life until my 50s. And then step by step, I began to walk into the light every day, asking myself, what can I be in charge of today? What do I have control of today? And I'll have to shout, it didn't take me long to realize that I could be in control, I could be in charge, I could be the determining factor in my life every single day with every single decision. If I made a decision to walk into a meeting where I wasn't particularly comfortable, I could shift. I could make a change in how I felt. So I would say, okay, I see you. You're scared of going in there. You're scared of making a fool of yourself. You want everyone to like you, like always. You're hoping that you look good. You're hoping that you're not going to stick your foot in your mouth. Better to sit in the corner and pretend that you're smart than open your mouth and prove that you're stupid. I get that. But what would it look like today if I chose to be my very best self? Well, I would walk into this room shining, because my very best self is absolutely incredibly beautiful. And they don't see anything else but my shine. They don't even see the clothes I'm wearing. They don't see how I look. They just see my shine. And I began to believe that. So that when I walked into a room, I would tell myself, you got this. You are the most likely person to succeed at being your best self. Step in, step in. Even as I would open the door, I would just try and see myself stepping in before I did and what that shine looked like. People tell me, Mary, I saw you shining for a long time, the fake shine. But now when you see me, you see my real shine. You see myself looking out to you. You see myself reflecting who I am, and what you see in me exists in you. When we step out of victimhood, others recognize it. They're like, I want to do that. I want to step into being my very best self. I'm going to do another whole podcast on what that means and what that looks like to be your best self. But let's just start with this today. I don't care what your circumstances. I don't care if you came out of childhood sexual abuse. I don't care if you came out of, being disfigured physically. I don't care what it is. That you can be in control of who you are today. I absolutely believe. There's nothing in this world that your mind cannot overcome. Even though your physical body might be something different, maybe you have a handicap, maybe you are disabled, but your mind does not have to live as a victim. One of my very best examples of this is my dear friend Sarah Foley, the vertical blonde. She was in an accident and she was paralyzed from the waist down. And she is about as cute as a bug's ear. Seriously, she is this tiny little blonde thing with a personality bigger than life. And suddenly, she couldn't walk. Suddenly, she was the victim of an accident. Suddenly, just like Christopher Reeves, just like so many people that we have seen now, were victims of what happened to them. And were they going to stay stuck as a victim, or were they going to rise above? Sarah might have been voted the most likely to succeed in her high school class because she was freaking amazing. And then her accident then maybe changed the least likely to succeed as she struggled to find her place. The other day I visited Sarah in her home. It's one thing to see Sarah out in her hot pink fuchsia stuff and wheeling up on stage in her wheelchair and having the mic in her hand. It's another thing to see her in her home and the daily struggles that she has to set the table, to do the dishes, to open the door, to get dressed. But she's not letting that ever keep her down. Now, Sarah has my vote for most likely to succeed. Chad Hymas, same thing. A horrible horse accident, paralyzed from the waist down. I could name you so many of people who their life could have been completely over, just like mine could have been. I could have been beaten down to the point where I chose not to stand up. But all of us have something in common, and that is we made a decision to not be a victim. We made a decision to stand up. And if you think this talk doesn't apply to you, then you're playing the victim. If you think, well, Mary doesn't understand my circumstances, she doesn't understand where I've come from and where I live, or she certainly wouldn't think that I possibly, if you think a bit of that, if you think one iota of that, you're playing the victim. And you can change. I believe in you. I see you. I've seen it in hundreds, thousands of other people. I've seen it in myself. And that's why I know it's possible. How do you move from that downtrodden, beaten, fat little girl to who I am today? You make a decision. You make a decision to no longer be a victim and to every single day choose your best self. I see you. I do. I know you. I do. And if you think that this is a possibility for you, you've already won. So let's get started. Let's get started being our very best self. And I want you to keep a notebook and a paper and a pen. And every time that you feel that tightness, you feel that that's not for me, I can't possibly, how could they do that to me? The moment you think, well, they fired me from my job, that wasn't my fault. The moment you think any of those things, that any piece outside was in control of your life, write it down. Write down every time. And then say, what could I choose instead? You can choose to step in to your very, very best life, like I have, like all these people who are my personal friends have. What we have in common? The belief that we are not victims, and the knowing that we're in control. I invite you to start and craft your meaningful life and embrace this today. Namaste.
Crafting a meaningful life.